Welcome everybody to today's webinar called Striving to Thriving, How Listening to the Experiences of Young People Can Help Black, Hispanic, and Lower Income Students Succeed. If this is all your first webinar that you've joined us for FCAN, hello, my name is Kimberly Lent. I'm the Assistant Director for Research and Policy here at Florida College Access Network. If y'all have any questions after the fact or during the webinar, you can email me at the email address here. Follow me on Twitter, tweet at me at krlent at any time during the broadcast or after. So we have 5 wonderful guest presenters with us today. They're going to introduce themselves in a little bit, but the first with us is Michaela Leslie Rule. She is with Wonder Strategies for Good. Next, we have Nate Cadena. He is with the Denver Scholarship Foundation. Amy Simon with Goodwin Simon Strategic Research. Roz Pearson with Lumina's LLC, and Emily Lockwood with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. You can submit your questions at any time in the chat box on the side, and we love when you engage with us on social media. So on Twitter, you can see us at flcollegeaccessnetwork.com. At Florida College Access. Hashtag FCAN, hashtag Talent Strong Florida, which is a new campaign that we recently launched. And if you want to give some love to our friends with the Equitable Futures Project, hashtag Striving and Thriving. And just as a reminder, this webinar is going to be recorded and all the materials will be available within the week of the recording. So we know we have a lot of new folks with us today on our FCAN webinars. So just a little background on who we are. So a little bit on our mission. So we lead the collaborative movement to ensure every Floridian achieves an education beyond high school and a rewarding career. And our big vision is a Florida working together where education is the pathway to economic mobility for all. We accomplish our job in 3 main ways. The first is through research and data. The second is through local college access networks. These are place-based organizations that really come together at the local level to focus on talent and workforce needs. Currently, they represent 82% of the state's population. The third way we accomplish our mission is through our statewide initiatives. Called College Ready Florida, we have 4 initiatives that build college-going culture and ensure that students are on a pathway to go towards post-secondary education. We also use 7 conditions for success to really guide our work and as a lens to see where we're going. You can read more about these on our website, but for today's purposes, this webinar really focuses on opportunity for everyone, clear information and guidance, and multiple pathways for success. So we encourage you to go to our website and read a little bit more about our 7 conditions and how they guide our work. So at this time, I'm really excited to welcome Michaela Leslie Rule. I'm going to turn it over to her, and she's going to kick us off so you all can learn more about their new report from the Equitable Futures Project. Michaela, over to you.
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I just want to really just say thank you to Kimberly Lent and the Florida College Access Network for inviting us to share the learnings from Striving to Thriving, I'm sorry, and also to all of you for being with us today. Next slide. We first want to just thank and acknowledge the nearly 5,300 young people across the United States who participated in this research. They shared their stories, their experiences, their hopes, their dreams, and their challenges with us, and we're forever grateful for their trust and their contribution to our learning. We also want to thank our advisory team. Next slide. This is a group that served as an authentic thought partners for us. They were problem solvers. They were contributors to the project. They provided really rich insights that helped to refine the project and the research approach and really grappled with some of the potential implications of the findings, as well as serving as insightful reviewers. Core to this research project and our dissemination strategy is centering young people's voices and lived experiences of young people. So one of the ways that we've done this, and what you might notice as you're seeing this presentation, is that we've approached the style, the design, and the imagery of our dissemination materials, including this presentation, in a way that tries to uplift the voices and perspectives and realities of young people. Throughout the presentation, you'll see some artwork, some illustrations from young people, and we want to acknowledge and thank those that shared their creative work. So I want to just kick us off by giving you a sense of how we're planning to structure this webinar. We'll start with a research briefing. We'll give you a sense of the overview of the work, a high-level overview of what we learned, as well as the project origin. We'll share with you 8 key insights that came out of this first phase of the research in 2018 and 2019. And then we'll have our advisor panelists chime in with some of their thinkings on what's next for the work. And then finally, Kimberly will lead us through and moderate a Q&A from all of you, where we hopefully can explore some of your insights around implications and any questions that you have about what we've presented. So with that, I'm going to ask Emily Lockwood from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to tell you a little bit about where this project started and what's important about doing the research at this time.
Great, thank you, Michaela, and huge thanks on behalf of the team at the Gates Foundation to all of you who have taken time out of your extremely busy time of year to join this webinar and to learn more about the research and the work that we've done. We deeply appreciate it. So before I kick it back to the research team and the incredible advisors who helped to inform this research, I thought I would just give a bit of a context setting on where the work came from and why we felt that it was so important to do it. So I am a senior program officer on the K-12 team at the Gates Foundation and also work on our cross-cutting pathways team, which is a new initiative within the US program team. The research that we are going to talk about today came out of an initiative called Equitable Futures, which was a project that we launched about 2 years ago, I'd say, maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point, that was really designed to think about the different systems, K-12 systems, post-secondary systems, employers, and what the connections between those need to look like if the system is orienting to outcomes for young people that are really about the type of life that they want to have, the type of career that they want to have, and what would it look like for all of those systems to be working together and designing in a way that actually is about that pathway for young people. So we launched a project in that space really designed to help us figure out, well, what is the work that's already being done? What should we be doing? Where does it make sense for us to invest? Does it make sense for us to invest? So we spent the first 6 months or so really trying to just listen and have conversations. Many of you are probably on this call right now of people that we've talked to about what's needed and where there's interesting new ideas happening, where there's promising models emerging, et cetera. And one of the things that emerged from those conversations and was really a pretty consistent drumbeat throughout the beginnings of the strategy development was really trying to deeply understand how young people are making decisions about their careers and the types of paths that they want. And very specifically, how Black and Latino young people and young people experiencing poverty are making those types of decisions. So who are the people that they're exposed to? What are the opportunities that they have access to? What's really forming their sense of identity around career and work? And so this work that you'll hear about today was designed to be one of several pieces of research in this broader portfolio to understand essentially occupational identity and how is that formed. We did some social listening analysis. We did some sort of desk academic research. And this piece, I think, has been the most critical, which is actually talking to young people themselves and hearing from them and listening to them and servicing the things that they care about as they're thinking about their futures and decisions that they're making along that pathway. So that was sort of the intent of the research. I will say that because, and you'll hear more about this, because it was so expansive in nature in terms of, you saw how many young people were a part of the research and the types of questions that the team asked were really about who they are as people and what matters to them as people. We have found so many different applications for this research. So it has helped us to answer this question around occupational identity, but it's also helped us to think about outcomes differently. It's helped us to think about research differently or program design. So I'm hopeful that all of you on this call will be able to pull out some of the bits and pieces that feel relevant to the work that you're doing. It's an incredibly rich data set, and we're really thrilled to share it with you all today. So I will pass it back over to Michaela, who will dig into the good stuff.
Thanks, Emily. So we wanted to just help you to understand the design of the research. We're thinking of this now as a two-phase research project because we're in the midst of doing some additional research with young people in 2020. The project was led by Goodwin Simon Strategic Research. My colleague Amy Simon is on this call and she'll be helping me to walk through the findings. In 2018 and 2019, the project was explicitly focused on occupational identity formation. It was 16 months and explored how young people's identities, values, beliefs, lived experiences, and emotions support or interfere with their educational and work goals and success, and then also the challenges they face in achieving those goals. A second piece of this was around, of the phase one research, was an inquiry into the lives and lived experiences of Black and Hispanic young people in particular, and young people that are living in lower income households. The second piece of this phase, this work in the second phase that we're in the midst of right now is 2020, is a National Youth Tracking Survey in 2020. And this is designed to learn how young people who are Black and Hispanic and white young people from households with lower incomes are experiencing COVID-19, racial justice uprisings and protests, and how they understand these experiences, how they understand these experiences to impact and influence how they think about their educations and future careers. Amy's going to take you through our approach to this research, the heart-wide approach, and then share with you a bit more about the methodology. Amy?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Michael, and my apologies. So thank you, everybody, for joining us here today. It's been a genuine privilege to work with Michaela and Emily and her team and our wonderfully insightful advisory group members, as well as the young people who open their hearts and their lives to us. We're really grateful to have the opportunity to share their voices and the research insights today, and we invite you to dig into the full report to go more depth into all these rich findings. So my colleagues and I have spent the last 20 plus years conducting research on emotionally complex topics using a multidisciplinary and deep listening approach. We've developed an analytical framework that we call Heartwired. It's a psychologically informed approach to audience research. And we use this approach to unpack the ways that our audience's emotions, identity, lived experiences, values, and beliefs combine and collide to shape people's attitudes and behaviors. Next slide, please. For this work, we conducted research across the country, interviewing young people, parents and guardians, and adults in the communities in which they live. We gathered in rural, urban, and suburban areas for these focus group discussions. For all of our in-depth interviews and focus groups, we had moderators who are professionally trained in moderation on socially sensitive topics. As you might be able to see from the sampling of the discussions, our focus group moderators are matched with the race or ethnicity of the focus group participants. Next slide, please. After conducting landscape research analysis, which included a conceptual framework analysis, a national mapping of key social determinants, a polling review, and a media audit with social listening, we then began our in-person qualitative research. We conducted 7 one-on-one in-depth interviews with young people ages 15 to 20 in Gary, Indiana, and in Albuquerque. Our initial interview guide was then informed by the landscape research we had done, and then the insights from these in-depth interviews helped us to refine our inquiry and the questions that we would next explore in the focus groups that we did in person. So we conducted 57 in-person focus groups with Black, Hispanic, and white young people, parents and guardians and adults between November 2018 and June 2019. I can tell you it was a very, very busy time. Our target research population was Black and Hispanic young people of all incomes and white young people from families with lower incomes between the ages of 15 and 21. The focus groups among youth ages 15 to 21 were separated by race and gender to enable more open and frank discussions. In order to learn more about the experiences and mindsets of young people, we also conducted focus groups among parents and guardians of our target population and among adults who work or volunteer with our target population. For comparison and to understand how young adults who are further along in their career pathways think about and reflect back on their journey so far, we also conducted focus group discussions among Black, Hispanic, and white young adults ages 26 to 29 who had grown up in households with lower income, but now consider themselves to be middle or higher income, consider themselves to be thriving. The focus groups among those ages 26 to 29 and among parents and guardians and adult influence were separated by race, but they were mixed by gender. Next slide, or this, I'm sorry, this slide still. Okay, after completing all of the in-person qualitative research in the summer of 2019, we conducted 2 different multi-day asynchronous online focus groups, one in English and one in Spanish. Participants in those focus groups were young people from lower income households, ages 15 to 21. And we also included young adults, ages 26 to 29, again, who grew up in lower income households, but now identify themselves as thriving, as being in middle and higher income households. Next slide, please. So in advance of our in-person research and in partnership with Ramsey Ramey of Out Studio, we designed and developed a geospatial analysis of local communities across the United States. We identified hundreds of national data sets that are publicly available and free related to health, economic well-being and opportunity, socioeconomic factors, crime, education, environment, and demographics. We coded and weighted these data sets into 4 separate composite scores at the community level, one each for educational strength, economic opportunity, neighborhood strength, and health. We then combined all of these data outcomes into a single score to enable a comparison of communities across the US. This map visually depicts the overall composite score. Visually, the red areas are the worst off on these composite measures. The blue ones are the strongest. The gradations of yellow and orange and lighter blue show scores in between. This map is a really rich analytical tool. Next slide. Among other things, we use the map to help select the locations for our qualitative research, intentionally choosing areas that are deep red or orange, and often in close proximity to bright blue areas. On this map, you can see the mix of locations that we went to in those months. Next slide, please. The final research phase in 2019 was a large national online survey of youth that summer. Our in-depth analysis and insights from the focus groups informed the design and the areas of inquiry for this national youth survey. Young people were invited to participate through several online national consumer panels. Parents or guardians of minors gave permission for participation. Young people ages 18 to 21 opted in on their own behalf. We should note that while online national consumer panels are not considered to be nationally representative probability samples based on US Census data, they are widely used and accepted by researchers and social scientists as valuable research tools, especially for populations that otherwise might be hard to reach. Next slide, please. So then COVID hit. And we felt that it was really important to understand how the pandemic was affecting all of these young people that we had been researching so intensively just the year before. So in June 2020, we did an asynchronous online focus group over 4 days, again, among our target population. And then we followed that by a survey of 1,300 young people in August. This survey that we'll be sharing data from today is the first of 4 tracking surveys that we're conducting among youth in August, September, October, November of 2020, to understand in more depth how current events are impacting young people and the way they're thinking about their future, education, and work, as well as about their present. So with all of that in mind, turn it back over to Michaela to share some of the key insights from the research.
So thanks, Amy. In the focus groups in the national survey, young people shared their emotional connections and relationships to education and career, including the different pathways they envision taking to reach their career goals. Analysis revealed 8 key research insights that help to shed light on how young people think about and experience education and career pathways. And as I said in the overview, we'll be focusing on 2 insights during this presentation, but want to provide a quick orientation to the other 6 so that you have a sense of what the space is like. So young people who are Black and Hispanic and those from families with low incomes see themselves as their own best change agents. They're optimistic, capable, and resourceful, and they value career exploration. This version of how young people see themselves is sometimes at odds with how adults, including parents and guardians, see them. Next is most young people aspire to a good life. Many are not tethered to the specific position or type of career they will do as adults, but instead are concerned with the qualities of that career and what it will feel like or be like to do the career in the future. In other words, they're not asking themselves, what do I want to be? Instead, they're asking, how do I want to live? Next is that young people value opportunities to try on their futures. Young people across income levels, race, and gender said that they want opportunities to be exposed to and explore possible career and work opportunities. Young people from families with lower incomes are more likely to feel pressure from parents to select a career pathway prematurely without engaging in any kind of significant exploration. Young people value the opportunity to engage in conversations about their future with peers and near peers in a space free of adult judgment. Many of the groups ended with young people exchanging contact information with each other or resources, Instagram handles, saying that they wanted to stay in touch and help each other to be accountable to their respective goals. Also, this was seen among adult participants as well, one of whom said this was like having a parent revival, meaning that he felt reinvigorated and re-energized by speaking with parents of similarly aged kids. On the bottom left is young people know that connections and relationships with positive adults can be empowering, and that these relationships can support them as they pursue their career and life goals, but they don't always know where or how to find or cultivate these relationships. Young people experience work as surviving, striving, and thriving. So they understand that their personal and work experiences characterize their pathways to achieve their version of a good life. Surviving, striving, and thriving is an emergent framework that we developed to understand the emotional and aspirational states young people pass through and expect to pass through as they pursue their career and life goals. And notably, these states are not fixed, but they're rather a continuum where each state can flow into the next. So as young people learn more about themselves through sort of personal experiences or indirectly about occupational options, and as they make occupational choices, it starts to sort of impact their perception of surviving, striving, and thriving. We'll spend the remainder of our time during this portion of the webinar digging more deeply into two insights, the last two on this page. Young people envision pathways to thriving, and young people experience the identity as an asset. Again, just to echo what Amy said earlier in the webinar, we encourage you to visit the Equitable Futures website to download this deck and associated reports just to learn more than we're sharing today. And with that, Amy, please kick us off with young people envision pathways to thriving.
Thank you, Michaela. So young people really do envision their own pathways in which they're thriving. They envision their futures as thriving for themselves. When asked in the focus groups to share how they imagine their lives at ages 25 and 45, many young people described imagining that they will feel fulfilled with their choices, that they will have enough money, resources, and power to take care of themselves, their parents, and their families. And importantly, a sense that they have control over their own destinies. Next slide, please. An important finding in this research is to underscore that across race, ethnicity, and gender differences, most young people describe and demonstrate a great deal of optimism about their futures. Young people describe a diversity of life goals to which they aspire, and they believe a wide variety of careers or occupations could enable them to live that good life to which they are aspiring. Next slide, please. Young people's differences may more readily lie in how equipped they feel to set goals for themselves and how confident they are that they have or can locate the information, resources, and people and relationships that they need in order to reach their goals. Next slide. Other key insights are that young people often feel that they are alone in making decisions about their career pathways. They also often report believing that the biggest barrier to their success will be themselves, what they perceive as their own personal weaknesses or shortcomings. Next slide, please. Young people continue to be optimistic about their futures, but in the survey data, which we asked the same question in 2019 and 2020, we do see a significant drop. So in 2019, overall, 67% of respondents were either extremely or very optimistic about their future, that they could achieve the kind of life that they want. In 2020, notably, overall, that had come down to 50%. And you can see some very large drops, in particular among Black respondents, Black youth from 74 to 24, 20-point drop, as well as a 10-point drop among Hispanic respondents, 12-point drop among white. So drops among all groups by income and by race, but significant ones in particular among Black people, Black youth. Let's go to the next slide, please. Notable and perhaps relevant, especially for you all with the work that you do, is that we also asked people about their perception of the value of college. And that has declined again between 2019 and 2020 as young people are doing sort of different calculations about the role and value of college for them relative to the time and the cost. So in 2019, overall, 71% of respondents said that it would be worth it to them to go to college, and now it's down to 62%. So again, still a strong number, 62, but notably down. Next slide, please. In each focus group, youth participants were asked to complete an exercise in which they articulated a job, work, or career goal, and then wrote down in sequential order the steps, stages, experiences, or opportunities they imagined they would need to pass through in order to reach their goal. This exercise was duplicated in the young adult groups of participants ages 26 to 29, where they actually completed two pathways, one in which they reflected on their past pathway that led them to where they were in the present, and another one that imagined their future pathways looking forward. Parents, guardians, and adult influencers also completed pathways in which they were asked to imagine the goals and pathways that they would want for their own children ages 15 to 21, or for those young people with whom they worked or were volunteers with. Today, we'll focus solely on the pathways created by youth ages 15 to 21. So this research suggests that young people across race, age, and gender form their occupational identities in similar ways. Young people's ability to conceptualize their goals and make a plan to achieve their goals can be characterized as 5 different types of states. So the first category is that they know what they want to do and they know how to get there. The next category is that they're not sure what they want to do, but they have a good idea of the steps that they need to take to explore in order to get where they would want to go. The next is that they know what they want to do, but are unsure of how to get there. The next is that they're not sure what they want to do, and they're unsure of what steps to take. And then the final is that they know what they want to do, they think they know how to get there, but their imagined pathway isn't accurate or it's unrealistic in some way. So we want to note that the first 2 states here know what they want to do and know how to get there, and not sure what they want to do, but have a good idea of the steps they need to take to explore in order to get there, are what we would consider to be desired states. So to help bring this element of the research to life and the findings, we'll share an example of each of the 5 pathway categories that we saw. Go to the next slide. So first, we have knowing what they want to do and knowing how to get there. This example comes from a 19-year-old Black male in New York who wants to become a video game trainer and manage his own team. In his pathway, he demonstrates knowledge of the steps he will need to get there, steps that are focused on skills development, in this case being promoted at his job at GameStop, playing the games, and competing in competitions. He also writes that relationships he builds and those he's benefited from have been particularly helpful to him as he has pursued his dream career. 5 steps down from the top of the image, being trained by peers and near peers, currently works as a sales associate at GameStop, becoming a trainer himself and learning from other gamers. His sense of timing, which he explained in the discussion around the written pathway, is also significant. He says by the time he turns 21, he must be scouted by one of the teams that he respects. He explains that he knows this because he read an article that brain development slows down after age 21, and he may not have the ability to learn as quickly or master new games after that. After he is scouted by a major team, he feels the remainder of his pathway in his career goal may take 20 years to achieve. He knows what he wants to do, and he has put himself on a pathway that includes a series of incremental and interconnected steps that he believes will prepare him for success in his chosen profession. Next slide. In the focus group, he speaks to a lack of support from his parents and guardians and the profound impact that his relationship with his roommate has had on his dreams and goals, and his confidence that he can achieve them. I think the only person that inspired me to actually pursue what I wanted to do is my ex-roommate, because I was actually really tired of living with my parents at the age of 16. I moved out and I started living with him. And then he pushed me to actually get better at what I was doing, gaming. He was like, why don't you just turn it into a career if you love it so much? Go to the next slide, please. So in the survey, both in 2019 and 2020, we asked people this question about how they felt about their own pathways, and we gave them 4 options. So one of the options we can't capture in the survey, which is that they think they know what they want to do, but their pathway is unrealistic because they have no way, of course, of assessing they're unrealistic. So we'll share the data on the 4 pathways that we're able to measure. So in this survey in 2019, 46% of young people overall said that they know what they want to do and they know the steps to get there. Reflecting some of the other uncertainty and drop in optimism that we have seen in the other data so far, this has actually dropped down 13 points of certainty from 46 down to 33 points in 2020 among all respondents. Next slide, please. So the second desirable state is not sure what they want to do, yet have a good idea of the steps to get there. Importantly, this includes their ability to find and seek information about their interests and strengths. This includes building relationships or expanding their networks and finding information online or on social media. Young people are often proud of being able to find information on their own, and it feels important that adults balance their desire to do so with adults' desires to provide practical support and information. This pathway is from a young woman in Chicago who aspires to be a traveling nurse or start a nursing foundation and or run at least 5 dance studios. She's currently out of school and hopes to begin a licensed practical nursing program in order to eventually become an RN. She has very detailed knowledge of the instructional elements of her pathway. That is to say, she knows there are LPN to RN bridge programs that she can participate in and that will get her on her pathway to her goals. Ownership also figures prominently in her goals on her pathway. She anticipates using the money from her first career, nursing, to open her first dance studio, which she hopes will lay the foundation for a chain. She also has relational steps, those that are based in relationships. In boxes 5 and 6, reading from the top to the bottom, you can see that networking figures prominently in her pathway. Go on to the next slide. She has confidence that her personal disposition will help her to reach her goals. She says, I'm already getting it. I'm networking. I'm meeting. I'm bumping elbows with the right people. You feel me? I make great rapport with people. I think everything in life is about first impressions and being able to know how to talk to people. You know what I'm saying? If you come to people in the right tone of voice and you tell them what you're trying to do, you could probably end up with something, an investment of money. I'm just one of those people that believe, and I use my beliefs to get through my life. Go to the next slide, please. So in the survey in 2019 and again in 2020, we asked people about this perception of their own pathway. Not sure what I want to do, but I have a good idea of the steps to take to get there. And in 2020, that's up a little bit by 5 points overall, from 15% of respondents up to 20% of respondents. Go to the next slide. So other young people know what they want to do, but aren't sure about how to get there. In this example from a young white man in Yakima, Washington, you can see that there are feedback loops and gaps in the pathway. He says that he has already been admitted to the University of Washington, Seattle, but he cannot afford tuition, so he's decided to join the military after graduating from high school. He places himself one step in from the beginning of the pathway, having already finished an internship in computer engineering. For this young man, the military functions as both an opportunity to explore his interests and also an opportunity to try out or to try on a specific career culture and pathway. If he doesn't like it, he will, quote, retire in his words. If he does, then he will embark upon a career in the military. If he retires, he isn't sure how he might learn more about or make decisions about what kind of career he might want to pursue. For this young man, family, having a partner, a wife in this case, and kids is both a personal goal and also something he imagines can become a challenge as it becomes difficult to manage the responsibilities and culture of the military with having a family. His sense of where he's going in life relies almost entirely on a single experience or opportunity, in this case, the military, and although he has a sense that his path may not go according to his plan, he doesn't have a plan B. Let's go to the next slide. Finally, his perception of what is possible for him and his sense of belonging as it relates to work and career is strongly influenced by his family. He says, well, now it's between Army and Air Force, but I'm leaning more towards Army because Army offers promotions. And with the Air Force, there's not really much promotional opportunity. My family members, like I have 3 brothers in the military, they were all in different branches. My dad was in the Army, my mom was in the Navy, my grandpa was in the Navy. It's just kind of like a family thing. I just feel that serving a great country and enjoy doing it while doing something you love and having a good life while doing it. Next slide, please. In the survey, again, between 2019 and 2020, in this instance, we saw very little change. 28% overall said that they know what they want to do, but they're unsure about the steps to get there. And this year in 2020, that's virtually unchanged statistically at 26%. Let's go to the next slide. Another young group of people said they weren't sure what they want to do and are also unsure about what steps they might take to get there. For some young people, not knowing was a sense of anxiety, something they'd been thinking about before the focus group. In this example, a young Black man begins his pathway on the left side of the page. He's currently helping his mother at home by working and paying some of the household bills. He intends to continue working out of college and then become rich. When he's rich, he'll be able to work on cars and play football. He aspires to play college football at some point in his life. Let's go to the next slide. In this example, it's difficult to determine the degree to which the exercise itself felt difficult for the man to complete. It's vague and sparse. There are no supports or supportive relationships mentioned, and also no barriers to success. As he presented his worksheet to the group during the discussion, he said, "There ain't no goal at the end. I was thinking about working, being a doctor, and help people out. It's like there are people dying. And when I was a kid, I would see doctors help people come back to life." Perhaps, interestingly, his pathway makes no mention of being a doctor and also does not have any of the instructional steps necessary to actually become one. Next slide, please. In the survey, this is again something that had little change between the 2 years. 2019, 6% self-reported that they're not sure what they want to do and that they're not sure about the steps to take to get there. And in 2020, that's essentially unchanged at 7%. Next slide. The final pathway category we observed is knowing what you want to do and think they know how to get there, but their imagined pathway is inaccurate or unrealistic. In this example, a young Latina mother describes her pathway to become a detective or work in forensics. She places herself off of the pathway, saying she needs to get motivated to begin moving towards her goals. When she's a bit older, 21.5 years, she says she will enroll in school, although she will wait another year before enrolling. Part of her pathway is dependent on the age of her child, and she says she's trying to balance her desire to be home with her son and her desire to begin working towards her career. She says she thinks she will need the support of God and her husband, and that the biggest barrier to success will be herself. At the bottom of the pathway, she has written, "My challenge will be probably me wanting to quit." Next slide. The steps she anticipated taking to get to her career goals are both vague and specific. For example, when describing her timeline for becoming a detective, she says, "The training is 6 months and you have to maybe get the promotion to be a detective because not everyone can be a detective or forensic. It takes years sometimes being in a field just as a sheriff." So as I hand it back to Michaela, just wanted to close this section by saying that this research suggests that young people across race, age, and gender seem to be forming their occupational identities along similar types of pathways. However, we did find wide distribution of career and life outcomes across and at the intersections of these demographic groups. So back to you, Michaela.
Thanks, Amy. So this is our second insight that we just wanted to give you a little bit more detail on. So within a personal, familial, and community context, young people believe that their personal identities are largely an asset and will be beneficial to their success in life. So young people experience their identities as an asset. Next slide. While young people aim to thrive, how they imagine getting there is deeply informed by their individual identities and their sense of self. Many Black and Hispanic young people in particular feel that their race, their ethnicity, and their culture will benefit them as they pursue their life goals. They understand their race and ethnicity as multidimensional, that they are experiential. And in the focus groups, young people were asked to create a list of the words they would use to describe their race, ethnicity, background, and culture. And while some young people understood this prompt to be explicitly about race and ethnicity, others focused on their role in their families, community norms, or positive associations they have with their race or ethnic group or groups. Next slide, please. Here, a young Black man in Atlanta says, "Black people are the strongest folks on earth." Next. In the online focus groups, a young Latina woman says, "My gender is especially important to me," and then goes on to describe how the way she expresses her gender gives her confidence. She goes on to call out culture and its relationship to the food she eats, her religion, and then her race as a way of connecting to her ancestors and to the past. For some young people, race, ethnicity, and culture overlap with one another. Next slide, please. Among Spanish and non-Spanish speaking Hispanics, language, food, nation of origin, music, and traditions are deeply connected to their experience with and their understanding of their racial and ethnic identities. Here, a young Hispanic woman from Belgrade, Florida says, I describe myself American, Cuban, white, but I mean, I don't blend in with Cubans necessarily. The majority of my friends are Mexican, so I'm more them than Cuban. Cubans they're not quiet. I identify more with Mexican culture because I actually like their food better too. Young people describe themselves in mostly, oh, go ahead to the next slide, please. So young people describe themselves in mostly positive terms, but when asked explicitly to describe their strengths, many young people from lower income households struggle to draw a connection between their positive self-descriptions and strengths, the word strengths that could be applied to the jobs or careers that they wish to pursue. Next slide, please. Here, a young white male in New Orleans describes himself as open-minded, nice, caring, trustworthy, loyal, funny, and brave. Next slide, please. And a Hispanic young man in Oakland says, I'm antisocial with new people. I'm a jokester, I draw, I have great imagination. And these are both examples taken from early in the focus groups when young people are asked to create and complete this description exercise. Later on in the groups, the same participants are asked what they think they're good at or what their strengths are. And young people from lower income households often struggle to articulate these strengths in connection to work. Whereas, next slide, higher income young people who we spoke to as a comparison group more readily drew the connection between both their positive descriptions of themselves and then the characteristics that could be perceived more negatively. For example, in Baltimore, a young Black woman says, my first word was procrastinator. I procrastinate a lot, like a lot. It's really bad, but that has also made me resourceful, a skill that she believes will help her in her career and her work. And this ability to connect one's positive perceptions of self to career and work, or the ability to kind of spin it, one's potentially more negative characteristics, was just not observed among young people from lower income families. Next slide, please. As young people grow, they accumulate other lived experiences that inform their expectations of how race, ethnicity, and gender will impact their career pathways. The young people we spoke with anticipate experiencing racial discrimination and to some extent gender bias. However, they believe they can overcome these challenges by being and doing better, and that the burden of overcoming racial and gender biases rests on their shoulders. Next slide. In Pueblo, Colorado, a young Hispanic woman says, going into it, you could say, I think this person is going to be racist. I just feel it depends on your attitude too. Next. A young Black man in New York says, being Black is hard. To be gay on top of that is 10 times harder. You must have to prove yourself 10 times more to get noticed. Then he shares his strategy for being noticed. I just try to start everything out with a joke. Finally, in Greenville, Mississippi, a young Black woman speaks to her concern that men in the nursing program she wants to attend will think they are more knowledgeable than she is. She says, that just makes me want to go harder, and I got to be stronger because males in the program already feel they have more power than women. At the time of the focus groups, young people overwhelmingly felt that it was up to them to navigate the system as it is, even if it was an unjust system. Very few felt that they had the power to change the system or that the system could be changed. It's possible that this has shifted in our current context in which young people, in particular, Black young people, are at the forefront of seeking social change. And Amy's just going to share a little bit of that, some of our insights from that ongoing research now before we jump into a quick chat with our panelists. Next slide.
Thank you, Michaela. So in our survey this year in 2020, we asked closed-ended questions, but we also asked open-ended questions and gave young people a chance to type in their responses to those questions. So we wanted to explore how young people are experiencing this moment with racial justice, as well as other issues such as climate change, gun violence, gender equality, immigrant rights, LGBTQ rights, and voting rights. So here we'll share some data about the racial justice movement. So we asked people, please tell us some of the ways in which the protests around police violence and racial justice have changed the way you're thinking about your future education and goals. And we asked this only of people who told us that they had an impact and had changed their thinking. So this young Black woman said, I've completely changed my major from business to criminology, something I did not even consider taking before all of the racial inequities, but had to completely change, so maybe I can make a difference. Next slide, please. So we had a white female who said, I'm more conscious about companies and ethics. and then a Hispanic male who said, I think that it changes stuff because it makes you not want to represent or work for a racist. Next slide, please. So we asked people about how much two different things that are happening right now have changed their thinking about their future education and career goals. And we asked specifically about racial justice and also about the coronavirus outbreak. So 22% overall among respondents for both said that it had strongly changed their thinking at 8 to 10 on a scale of 0 to 10, although the distribution is somewhat different, as you can see, by race and income. So for example, in terms of the coronavirus, 24% of Hispanics say that has changed their thinking compared to 21% around racial justice, whereas for Black respondents, it's 27% say that their thinking has been changed by the racial justice compared to 21% for the coronavirus. Next slide, please. We also asked in the survey, we gave people a list of issues and we said, here are issues where young people have recently been active in promoting change. For each of these, please tell us whether promoting change feels more like an opportunity, more like a burden, or whether it's not something you want to be involved in at all. And you can see here in terms of racial justice that a very strong majority across all race groups as well as income and gender feel that it is strongly an opportunity, not a burden. And it's notable that when you look at gender and race combined, there's very little differences in terms of Black females, Black males, Hispanic females, Black males. White females are a little bit more likely than white males to say that it is an opportunity, 62% to 56%. And with that, I will turn this over back to you, Michaela. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. So we just want to talk really briefly about activation, right? Because we've talked about a couple of the findings in more depth, and we've talked about the 8, sort of our methodology and how we got there. One of the sort of key pieces of our work now at Wonder Strategies for Good with our advisors and with partner organizations is to build and test frameworks and tools that will enable stakeholders like all of you to both center young people's experiences and also to activate this research in the specific work that you do. And as you can imagine, the diversity of the field requires that these tools take into consideration and help stakeholders to grapple with the opportunities the research surfaces and some of the complexities of authentically and intentionally centering young people's voices and experiences in a field that's dominated by adults. As I mentioned, our advisors are helping us to think this through. So I'm pleased to invite Nate Cadena and Roz Pearson, who are both with us here today, to just answer this very broad question that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of months. But if they could both just speak to their own experience about the opportunities and challenges in moving this initiative from theory to practice. Nate?
Well, first of all, it was a pleasure being on the advisory board. Being able to observe this research was fascinating. The interactions of different community members across the country, especially coming from an organization that serves thousands of Black and Brown folks. It was very informative, taking a look at positive considerations. The conversations were really uplifting. I think that was probably one of the biggest pieces that I got out of this was the asset base and focus of these young people from considering everything from culture to experience. One thing that was notable though, and not necessarily coming from student voices, was just trauma coming from systems. And that's one of the pieces that I think that we want to be mindful of when we think about challenges and opportunities, that the identity formations that the young folks shared with us, and I'm considering young folks, even the young adults, just by comparison to me, it's really, really an opportunity. If you dig into this research, you're going to find that people are making positive strides with that generalized baseline that they're coming from. The research, the practice was really, really open to listening and really not prescriptive, which was informative for me, considering how I could take a look at what I was observing and put it into practice in a community serving organization. Identity as an asset with infinite potential rather than limiting prescription is really kind of the general attitude that I pulled from this. One of the pieces that I do think, as we talk about systemic trauma, which is kind of the framework that everyone has come up in, especially those in the subject of the research, was exploring different stigmas, which really comes to be important when you're talking about pathways and opportunities and how one sees themselves in the future. Even though a potential pathway might be really well suited, a stigma of a bad situation with a teacher or a law enforcement officer really does influence these sorts of equitable pathways conversations. Systemic tensions continue to be an issue for implementing services and uplifting students in this framework, partially because lots of us who are looking at implementing this research into practice, such as the Denver Scholarship Foundation, we're sending students, infusing them into systems that were not built for traditionally Black and brown folks. And somehow some communities and cultures have devolved into continually keeping folks out. So when we coach young individuals through this framework, it's really, really important to take the positive, empowering piece of it. Workforce connectivity, near peer, the strength of near peer folks with shared backgrounds. One of the implementation pieces that we are moving with, based and definitely supported by what was observed here, is our hiring practices. Really making sure that we have either folks that are practitioners that mimic or share the background of those that were being served, which we know that either utilizing that and or infusing other resources that also share that. Self-awareness, self-confidence infused into the visioning exercises, even the different pieces that were, the narratives that were read. That exercise is just an exercise that was really fantastic, and we have used that in a couple of instances.
Nate,
but really sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna, not to cut you out, I was just gonna say I love hearing all of the ways that you've been able to integrate kind of your experience into your work.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, and what I think about it is folks come from different places. All the young people that sat in front of us in the research come from different levels of confidence, different levels of experience, different levels of support in their background. So what I really, really dug from this was the different pieces that you can utilize in different circumstances. That the old kind of prescriptive service is really gone. Young people are coming with different levels of self-confidence and self-awareness, and really, really leaning into that for a curriculum or services of self-empowerment that really fosters a positive self-efficacy. I think is really where we're headed. And
Okay.
Before I hand it over to Roz, I just want to say that I really, really was thinking about challenges and their community network, the quality of their network in the community, and the trauma that has been experienced in the community also continues to recycle in their familial networks, barbershop networks, church networks, that continues to be influencing, not necessarily, and it should be the network that holds folks up, but I think systemically, we continue to work within and live within a system that's difficult.
Thank you for lifting that up, Nate. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Ross, do you want to just jump in with the same question, just about sort of how you see opportunities or challenges moving from theory to practice, specifically given your work
Sure.
as a researcher, a peer researcher?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. I know you're having issues with your camera, so it's fine to just the audio.
Yeah, my camera is not being my friend today. So Nate's hard to follow, as you know. I think he summed up a lot of my sentiment and perspective on being a part of this initiative, and actually being able to hear and absorb the voices of young people in their own language, in their own time, from their perspective. I think when I think of being a part of this project, it's been really inspiring and motivating, but also challenging, because you have, as a woman of color, it's really challenging. You're living some of the experiences that you're hearing about, or you have lived some of the experiences that you're hearing about. And to try to balance what you're hearing and absorbing with how to move us forward as a culture systemically, is a juggling act. It's a tension that existed. If you're a part of a good advisory committee, there's going to be tension, there's going to be moments of reflection, there's going to be some challenges, and there were all of those things. And in listening to the voices of young people, I kept asking myself, what can I do as a researcher, as a business owner, as a representative of community of color, as a supporter and motivator of women and young men as well. And it helped me sort of figure out things like listening to the comments about young people wanting to try on careers and try on jobs and just kind of figure it out on their own. They know they have a very strong identity. They know they have a lot to offer, but they need a chance and an opportunity to try things. Something that simple. Try it on. And so what we did in my company is we decided to have interns during COVID that were virtual. And was it a challenge? Absolutely. We had a pair because we wanted them to have someone to rely on and share ideas with and bounce things off of, that weren't just us as employers and us as sort of older folks running a company. And it worked out really, really well. So I think when you go from what can you do as an individual in a theoretical sense to what you can do as part of a collective in order to build collective agency, not just individual agency, but to build collective agency, I think that there are numerous opportunities that we can do to keep learning, keep growing, keep absorbing the powerful information that comes from research like this, but also lay down some tracks too. Like, you can't just wait and so we'll see what happens and digest the information and then go, aha, we're going to start to build systemic change. You have to go, as we are trying to figure out the pieces and parts that help move us forward as a people and a culture, what tracks can we lay down now in the roles that we occupy that are going to keep young people at the center, to keep young people's voices at the table, which is probably even as more important as just at the center, and to help us be better listeners, interpreters, employers, mentors, champions, for young people and how they think about themselves, their identity, their education, their career paths, their life. When I look at this as how are we helping young people build healthier communities. So I look at it more at a community health level as opposed to just an educational initiative or just a career initiative or just about occupational identity. To me, it has to do with building stronger, better, healthier communities.
Yeah, and to all our friends who are on the lines, Kimberly from FCAN, we're nearing the end of the hour, but I just want you to know we put this in the chat. Our panelists are going to stick around for a little bit to ask your questions. So we know you all have busy schedules, but we're hoping that you can stick around and listen to some of their answers. And if not, you can always get in touch with me if you have questions, and I can pass them along to our panelists after the fact. So Michaela, back to you.
So I only have one more thing to say, really, which is that we are exploring some of the things that Nate and Roz have lifted up just now. This question about activation, we're exploring in the context of a Designing with Youth toolkit, and that'll be available in November. So we're trying to really think about what are the tools, what are the frameworks that will enable this to be activated by the field. And then also there's an interactive quote library. So you saw some of the quotes in this presentation, but we'll be creating a public-facing database of the quotes notes that'll be searchable. So that will be another way, sort of another entry point into the research. And then finally, the National Youth Poll on COVID-19, which we shared some of the findings from during this call from round 1. There are 3 more rounds of that survey between now and the end of the year. And we'll be updating our website, which Kimberly will share with those findings as we move through them. So with that, Kimberly, any questions that have come up?
Thank you, Michaela. So before we move into questions, I gotta make sure that we talk about our next webinar. So my colleague, Kathy McDonald, is hosting a webinar next Wednesday at 11 a.m. We hope you can join us. It's entitled From Research to Practice, Planning Inclusive Supports for Students with Intellectual Disabilities. Again, we hope to see you there. If you're interested in learning more about FCAN, we do policy briefs, more webinars, any promising practices, you can sign up for our news list at floridacollegeaccess.org/subscribe. And now we're gonna move into questions, and they are coming in, guys. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can all look at each other's faces. And it's just you and Michaela, you and me.
Thank you, okay, great.
So this one's for Nate. Anne has a question about systemic trauma that you talked about. Can you give some more examples and how you think this specifically, dig a little deeper into how you think specifically this affects students as they're thinking about their futures?
Sure. Again, we can talk about this all day, but when we think about a conversation that happens with a young person, and then we include an adult in their life, whether it's a parent, uncle, coach, what have you, oftentimes the influence of the different individual can encroach on the student's essential freedom, freedom of choice, of identity formation, to be completely free of those other bindings. You know, Denver is a largely historically Latino community, and the historic trauma of around the Spanish language in the community. You know, there's been conflicts in there to where when we think about the cultural pride and thinking about cultural characteristics as an asset, you know, even language, which a young person may have extreme pride in, you know, that they speak the same language as, you know, reggaeton, but you know that was a traumatic experience for their parents. There's conflicts there, and in, you know, numerous examples of those sorts of things that creep in when not only you explore with the student in their bare bones kind of discovery phase, but when you bring in the other decision makers and influencers in their life, those other that other baggage comes in, which could be a hindrance.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is a question about, a little bit more question about how you recruited students, especially for the polls. So this is probably an Amy question. So can you talk a little bit more about the students' organizations chosen to participate, and maybe if folks were interested in connecting with students in their local areas and maybe doing a mini experiment to copy. Just can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So for the focus groups, we recruit through recruiters that exist across the country. So there's a huge commercial market research infrastructure. There's billions of dollars spent on advertising, all that kind of stuff. And as social science researchers, we can sort of ride on the back of that huge turtle. And so we hire those recruiters to recruit young people. And we do that, we hire people in the local communities where we're doing the groups to do the recruiting there. So that's how we do that. And then for the survey, those are online consumer panels. So there are many, many consumer panels that exist across the country that have millions of people on them that are opt-in panels, where people have agreed to take surveys and get paid to do that. And so for us, we have combined multiple panels, consumer panels, so that we can make sure we're getting a really good mix of young people, and that's how we move out the survey.
Great. So Julia has asked us, do you have a template for that roadmap pathways boxes that the students filled out? It seems a lot of people are interested in that and implementing it in their own work. So is that going to be part of the toolkit? Is that something you're willing to share?
So yeah, so we haven't thought about it as an asset for the toolkit, but if you go to the website for Equitable Futures and you download the report, at the back will be the methodology section, and there you'll be able to see the blank template of what we used, and you can either reconstruct it for yourself or feel free to send an email to Equitable Futures and we can answer it and provide the worksheet.
And actually, I want to build on that. We were really so moved by how many young people felt really empowered and excited to actually sit down and do these pathways. And so if it is useful, we're happy to share not only the pathways, but the questions that we asked about them. There's an interview guide with standard questions that we used to help people fill them out and think about them, and then also to talk it through as a group. So that's certainly an asset that we're very happy to share and move out there.
I mean, as a researcher, I would love that, but I think many people who are in attendance today would also really appreciate that.
Just a comment about the map. No offense to whoever scribbled that graphic onto a napkin, but the real depth is in the questions. So, yeah, no offense.
It was a designer who designed it. We were very intentional about that pathway because we didn't want it to be rigid or a straight line. We didn't want each space to be the exact same size. So we actually put quite a bit of thought into the visual design of that pathway because we wanted it to be something that youth could make up for themselves and not be like trapped within, if that makes sense. So we didn't want it to be a ladder. There were a lot of things we didn't want it to be. So anyway, it's a great pathway.
So our next question, and this is probably getting a little bit into your toolkit and as you're thinking about activation of the findings, so maybe you can give us a little bit of a highlight. So do you have any ideas, again, using this research, on how to help students identify their culture as an asset? So how do we shift that conversation internally and that mindset?
So I would love to say, I love to be in a position where I can say, yes, we've solved for that. That is not the case. That's not my answer to that question. What our approach to the toolkit is I think probably the best answer to this question is that one of the pieces that we're working on is to develop a tool that's a diagnostic tool that's based around getting stakeholders to reflect on a series of design principles, one of which is around centering young people's voices, and a piece of that is around their identity and their culture as an asset, and sort of moving the field, similar to the way the field moved around SEL and social emotional learning, moving the field to a place where centering young people's lived experiences and specifically their perception of themselves as an asset is more central to our work and to the field's work. If you think about it as like a beta version, the beta version is the diagnostic, and we have sort of a, we're beginning to accumulate resources that help folks to sort of go to the next step, like what's the next step that I do once I've identified that this is a space for some additional growth. The next version of that tool will be crowdsourcing from probably many of you on this call, hopefully, your ideas about what the resources should be for stakeholders if they find themselves at this level of saturation, et cetera. So I don't have a easily formed answer to your question, but it is very helpful that it was raised so that we can think about what the resources are that need to be part of that toolkit.
Yeah, and I think many folks on the call today would be happy to lend any advice or feedback as you're thinking through some of that, because we're getting, again, a lot of really positive feedback to the research that you have all, reported out today.
I can just add one more piece to that. In terms of the pathways, in some of our later focus groups, we intentionally had 9 young people in the focus group, and then we had teams or triads of 3 young people sit together and talk through their pathways with each other and do peer-peer and near-peer sort of guidance and counseling. And it was really effective and really powerful to have people share ideas, and they felt really supported by that. It seems to me like there might be an opportunity to build some of that, sort of recognizing your what you might think of as a deficit as an asset or a strength. It seems like there could be an opportunity to have a little discussion guide around something like that. To help people who say, well, my mom says I never shut up and I'm too talkative, to be like, wow, so you're a really good communicator. So anyway, just some ideas around that.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we've come to all of our questions. So I just really want to thank everyone who attended this webinar, and to Michaela, Amy, Roz, Emily, Nate. We're incredibly grateful not only for you joining us, but for all the work that you're doing. And I hope as you continue this work, you consider all of us in Florida and FCAN partners along the way. We can't wait to watch what you're doing and to hopefully help where we can.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thanks to everybody who was on the call today, and thanks for staying late for the question session.
Yes, thank you. So with that, I will say goodbye to everyone on the call. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you on our next FCAN webinar. Have a great night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, everyone.